Hey, and welcome to another Tech Tuesday. This is Chad from Ascension Worship. This week I'm going to show you guys a useful trick while you're under quarantine. This is how to make a Cat6 shielded cable with an EtherCON connector. Now this video will also work if you are not using a EtherCON connector or if you are using a Cat5 instead of Cat6. It's going to be pretty interchangeable. This is just like the most involved option of all those. So a few things you're going to need, and I'm going to have a Amazon list or something in the description where you can find either what I have here or something very similar. But obviously you're going to need cable. We're going to investigate this more in a moment. But this is a Cat6 shielded cable that we'll be using. You'll need some sort of strain relief boot. So today we're doing EtherCON. So we've got the strain relief boot that's built into here. But I'll also, in the description, if you're making just plain cables without the EtherCON connector on there, you can find a strain relief boot like this that will work as well. And I'll also talk about making patch cables, so you'll need to use that for that. You'll need some sort of wire cutters, and ideally if you can get something with a flat edge at the end as well, that will be useful. We'll talk about that in a moment. A cutter tool for cutting the jacket off of the Cat6 cable. You'll need a shielded RJ45 connector. So notice how this is metallic on all sides. This is a shielded connector, so it will pass a ground through that metal. You will need an RJ45 crimp tool. You will need a RJ45 cable tester. And then this isn't 100% necessary, but when I test mine, because I like to test them with the EtherCON connector connected, I also like to use a EtherCON coupler. Hopefully you guys can see that okay in my lighting here. Sorry, I'm doing this from home with unusual equipment. But this will allow you to connect the EtherCON cable to your tester with the connectors applied, just to make sure that your grounding works all the way now. So if you don't want to do it this way, you can also use a continuity tester as well, but I like to do it this way so it's all done in one spot. And then for this to work, I've made two just regular patch cables that are connected to the other end of the coupler. So guys, please bear with me on this. I'm going to try and do this as best as I can for the camera and make this happen for you. So first rule is you don't go to work until you put your boots on. So if you're using an EtherCON connector, we're going to take the strain relief boot off of here, and we'll get to all the other goodies in a little bit. And we're going to put that on before we make any cuts to our cable. Otherwise, you're going to have to redo some work later. All right, we'll come back to this guy in a bit. If you're using just the regular RJ45 strain relief, you can do that. Now, the one in the description, which is this guy here, works best on Cat5, so it has a pretty small opening on there. So you can use your cutting tool just to remove some of this funnel on here, and it'll be a little bit easier to get onto a Cat6 cable. So now that we've got our strain relief boot on, we can cut the jacket off the cable. I'm going to just use my 2 fingers and my thumb here and just kind of measure out 2 finger worth of jacket that I'm going to cut off. It's somewhat arbitrary, but that's a good amount of drain relief. That's a good amount of drain wire that we'll use later. And you want your cables inside to be slightly too long so that you can kind of manipulate them better for later. I'm going to move this other stuff out of the way so we can do all this against the white background. So now I'm going to take my cutting tool here, and then you'll notice there's a few different notches. For me, I'm just going to use this first one, and I'm going to spin it around 2 or 3 times. Sometimes you'll feel a little pop when it works right. All right. And then you should be able just to break this off. Now, inside here, we can see we've got that black jacket on the outside, and then underneath that blue is an aluminum foil that goes the entire length of the cable. Now that foil touches this, which is a metal, what's called a drain wire. And then this is what will give you your grounding, is that wire touching that foil. So first off, make sure that when you cut this, that you don't accidentally cut that drain wire off. Otherwise, you need to start over. And for now, we're just gonna go ahead and fold that drain wire down against the cable. There's also a plastic protective sleeve in here. We can go ahead and just remove that. Now, if you didn't cut this deep enough and you had a lot of the black jacket left over, you may want to just go ahead and start over. Otherwise, if you can cut it so that there's not a lot of lip on here, then you're good to start moving forward. But if there's a lot of lip on there, when you go to push on this RJ45 connector later, it's going to catch on that and it's going to bunch up and it's going to make it really hard for you to push the cable in deep enough. So try to make sure there's a good solid cut on your jacket, but also verify that there's no cuts on your individual cables. Now, I'm going to put a wire diagram on the screen that we'll be referring to throughout the rest of the video. The standard that we're using is orange, white, orange, green, white, blue, blue, white, green, brown, white, brown. You don't have to memorize that now, but you probably will after a while. But you can just look at the graph to know what's going on. So for right now, we've got 4 pairs that are twisted, are orange, green, brown, and blue. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set those up like a cross, and we're going to just put them out to whatever end they're on. So we'll start with the orange. Whatever side it's on, just lay that out flat. And on the opposite side of the orange is going to be our brown. And then we've got our green and our blue, which again are going to be on opposite sides. Now, depending on which end of the cable you do, sometimes the green and the blue will be on opposite sides. It doesn't matter as long as orange is on your left, brown is on your right, and the other two are just wherever they end up at. So I'm going to fold them out as a little cross. I'm going to have that drain wire sticking out as well. And one thing that I like to do, especially if you're working with really heavy gauge cable, one thing that'll make your life a little bit easier later on is if we go ahead and flatten the cable a little bit. So with orange on the left and brown on the right, I'm going to take my cutting tool here and not cutting anything. I'm using the flat edge that's on here. I'm going to just flatten the jacket a little bit. You guys can see that. I know everything's black on here, so I apologize. And I'm just going about a 1/2 inch flat, enough for me to be able to grab really easy with my thumb. And that's going to make it easier because now we've got more of an oval shape for our jacket, which is going to fit in this connector a lot easier when we get to that point. All right, so now we can kind of flatten everything back out again and cut this plastic piece. Plastic piece will only show up in Cat6. So if you have Cat5, don't worry, you don't need to worry about this. But we're going to cut it as deep down as we can without cutting any of our individual wires. All right, and now we can start untwisting our cables our wires in the order that they're going to be in. So we'll start with the orange side. Part of the difference between Cat6 and Cat5 is that there's a lot more twist on Cat6. So it is a little bit of work and you're going to feel it in your thumbs later. So first color is orange-white. So I'm going to put that as far to the left as I can. I'm going to use my thumbs to straighten it out as best as I can. Doesn't have to be absolutely perfect, but definitely the straighter you can get, especially the part that's close to the jacket, the easier it's going to be when we get to cutting this and putting it into the connector. All right, so that's pretty decent. So we got orange, white, and then orange. If you're doing a lot of these, you can use your tool. Sometimes you can grab the edge of the tool as long as you don't strip the cable and kind of use it that way to straighten it out. But I'm just going to use my thumbs for today. Okay, so we got orange, white, and then orange. Then next is going to be green, white. So we'll do both the greens, but with green, white being closest to the orange. So green, white. Good enough. And then we'll go ahead and do solid green while we're on that area. So orange, white, orange, green, white, and then blue. So we'll start with solid blue on that opposite side. Okay. Orange, white, orange, green, white, blue, then blue, white, and then we go to green. So orange, white, orange, green, white, blue, blue, white, green, and then finally brown, white, and brown. Now what I'm doing is I like to call this a clamshell. By having them in their 4 different quadrants, but already set up in the right order, I'm going to just basically fold these in on top of each other. The orange and the brown will already be on the right side. I'm just folding in the green and the blue. And then it's going to all end up in the right order without a whole bunch of random twists happening to get there. And that's going to allow me to get that RJ45 connector on as tight as possible. So again, orange, white, orange, green, white, blue, blue, white, green, brown, white, brown. So the blues are going to be in the middle, green's just on the outside of them, and then orange and then brown on the outside. The other thing that we have to worry about before we start doing that is this drain wire. I really want it to be on the bottom side of the cable. And the reason why I want to do that is because if you look on the RJ45 connector, the bottom side is where this tab is. There's a lot more solid metal there. It's flatter versus the top where there's just kind of like a small section where that can go. And so what's going to end up happening is that when I slide this on, I want the jacket to push the drain wire right up against that metal connector. And that way I'll know that I have a solid connection. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go ahead and flatten this cable a little bit more. And then I'm going to put the drain wire just over between the blues and the greens. So between the blue and the green. And so it's ending up on the bottom of my cable. All right, so now, again, blue is going to be in the middle. So I'm just going to fold that over to the middle. Green on either side, and then orange on the left, brown on the right. So again, orange, white, orange, green, white, blue, blue, white, green, brown, white, brown. And then I'm just going to fan those in, use my thumbs, and start just kind of working them until they're a nice straight row as best as I can get it. And always checking my cable color code. So orange, white, orange, green, white, blue, blue, white, green, brown, white, brown. Just work them. Cat5 cable is a lot easier to work with in this regard. But the closer you can get this at the beginning, the less that you're going to have to, less chance you're going to have to redo it later. So I'm squeezing with my left thumb, and then I'm just kind of working with my right thumb. Again, orange, white, orange, green, white, blue, blue, white, green, brown, white, brown. Again, it doesn't have to be perfect the whole way, but that first little like ½ inch there needs to be as perfect as you can get it, because then it's going to slide into the connector a lot easier. Okay, so I think that's good enough. We're going to go ahead and try it. I'm got my thumb on the jacket. Just kind of got the flesh of my thumb touching on there, and then I'm going to take my cable cutters and I'm going to cut right at the edge of my thumb. Now, if you have like a work bucket or something, a toolbox, it's a good idea, especially if you're at church, to cut these over that so that you're not making a big mess on the carpet at the church or wherever you are. So now we've got our straight wires, and they cut pretty well on there, and I'm again holding it at the base. I'm going to slide on this RJ45 connector. I'm pushing the wires up against the roof of it so they'll hopefully stay in the right order. And I'm always checking that order, and I'm going to slide them in as far forward as I can. So again, orange, white, orange, green, white, blue, blue, white, green, brown, white, brown. Okay, that looks right in the little window there. Got my drain wire on the bottom, making sure that's in the center. And then I'm just going to push this as far forward as I can. There's a little window on the RJ45 connector, and if you'll notice, I can't see any of my colors in there. I just see the black jacket. That's good. That's part of the Cat6 standard, is that there can only be so much space where the cables are no longer twisted, because that's part of what helps with the noise rejection, basically. So we want to push that forward, make sure that we aren't showing a lot of bare wire in that little window there. I'm also looking at, I don't know if you'll be able to see this on camera, I can see the copper touching on the outside window of the connector. So, and again, I'm double checking orange, white, orange, green, white, blue, blue, white, green, brown, white, brown. I can see that's all right. So now that I'm happy with that, now I can throw the crimp tool on. Don't use the crimp tool until you know this is right, because once it gets on there, the only way to take it out is to actually crimp the connector. So this crimp tool has an 8P and a 6P option. We're using the 8P. So we'll put it in, give it a few squeezes, and there you go. Now, notice you've got a little bit of drain wire that's still left over. You could either cut that off. What I like to do, since I know it's going to get covered up by the EtherCON connector anyway, just to guarantee that it's touching the RJ45. And now on this one, you can see it's in there really well. Hopefully you can see that. But sometimes it'll end up off to the edge a little bit. So one thing I like to do is I like to take the excess, twist it up a little bit, and then put it back in like the corner of the connector, just so it's not going to poke anybody. You see, just slid that underneath there, and then just fold that loop of extra cable over just a little bit so that it's touching the connector. So it's just more points of contact for that drain wire, just to make absolutely certain that's in there. Because if it's not, you're going to have to start the whole thing over again. Okay, so now that we have what appears, apart from actually testing it, it appears to be a correct EtherCON cable. I could go ahead and test it now without the EtherCON on there, but I'm going to go ahead and add the EtherCON, and then we'll test it all at once. So with the EtherCON connector, we've already put on that strain relief boot, which we're going to come back to in a second here. We have the main barrel, I guess. I'm sorry, I don't know all the technology. I don't know all the terminology for all these. We got the main barrel here. We've got this blue part of the strain relief. We can go ahead and put that on. You'll notice there's a little notch. That part's going to go on the bottom of the cable. And then there's 3 different little tab pieces in there. For today, we only need the black one and the gray one. The black one's going to go on top. The gray one's going to go on the bottom. So black goes on top, which is pretty easy. Gray one goes on the bottom, and it holds the tab down. This is important. On some of the old EtherCON models, if that tab didn't go down, it could get locked into some of your equipment, which was no fun. And some of the old ones, you had to actually cut the tab off, and then the cable was useless for anything that wasn't EtherCON. So I like this because you can just put this black or this gray one on, and then it holds the tab down. But while you're doing this, you have to always make sure that that tab stays down, or else you might have problems later on. We can now take the barrel with the little hole is going to go on top, and you can see, I don't know if you'll be able to see this on the camera, there's a little notch on the bottom that's going to line up with the gray piece and the blue piece that we just put on. So I'm going to slide these on. I'm using my thumbs to help make sure that the black and gray pieces stay on properly. Give that on a little bit, and then we'll take our blue piece and again line up the notch with the gray. Hold that nice and tight. And then work that on. Now all we need to do is tighten the strain relief boot. You can do this pretty well by hand, but one thing that'll help you too is if you take your EtherCON coupler, plug this in, and then it just gives you a little bit more grip to work with when you're trying to tighten this. Okay, skipping ahead a little bit, here are two ends that I've finished. And again, I'm gonna show you how to test these with the EtherCON connectors on. So with just a regular Cat5 or Cat6, you can just take your two different ends here. You can plug them into this device. There's a transmitter and a receiver. And when you turn it on, you'll notice that the numbers should correlate all the way down, including this G for ground. So there's not an option for EtherCON Connect on there, but I know this cable works, so I just tested it. I have another cable that I did the same thing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have one end coming out of the transmitter, going into an EtherCON coupler. The other end, another patch cable coming out of the transmitter with an EtherCON coupler. And now all I need to do is plug in my EtherCON cables and test them that way. And you can see 1 through 8 are all working, and so is the ground. You may want to just kind of wiggle the end of the cable, make sure that that's not a loose cable in there, but everything is going to work even if it's messed around with. And that's it. We have now made a Cat6 shielded cable with EtherCON connectors, and we've tested it on both ends, and we are good to go. I hope this has been helpful for you and for your team. It's definitely a great way to save some money and to be able to maintain your existing cables. If you have any questions, please feel free to leave those below in our YouTube comment section. Until next time, have a great week. Again, this is Chad from Ascension Worship. I hope this has been helpful for you and your team. Come back here every Tuesday for new information.